of course, there's controversy about the reasons around the sanctions. And since then, there's been a major controversy over the continued sanctions within Zimbabwe in particular, polarized the debate. We've also seen that most of the EU sanctions have been removed, except for certain individuals and certain military-related companies. But the more comprehensive ones are the US SADC sanctions, which also place any veto on any kind of funding or loans from the international financial institutions. So there are, of course, controversies about how this has affected the country, how it has affected citizens. And today we'll get some insights from the two major speakers, as well as the discussants who I will introduce at a later date. So without much more ado, let me give it over to Honorable Mangwana to speak first.
Thank you. Well, Zimbabwe has been under sanctions since 2001. I think there's no debate about that. The United States legislated that it vetoes any financial assistance to the government. It is instructed the institutions like the IMF and the World Bank to stop granting assistance which other nations are entitled to do. As a result, it also warns its citizens against investing in Zimbabwe, against doing business with Zimbabwe. That in itself stops international investors from freely coming to Zimbabwe to doing business with Zimbabwe. Such a sanctions regime affects the development of the country. It also makes it very risky for international business people to come and invest in Zimbabwe. There is a very close relationship between Zimbabwe's economic affairs and the Western countries, particularly the United States. The United States is a very major trading partner and a source of international financing for Zimbabwe and other African countries. So for Zimbabwe to be able to develop like any other country in the world, it needs to have proper business relations with the sources of capital. And the United States is a major source of capital. Coming to the European Union, yes, although the sanctions are said to be now restricted to a few individuals, but the mere fact that we are every year, we are on the list every year of sanctions, since capital is a very shy animal, it only goes where everything is okay. So for Europeans who want to do business with Zimbabwe, the mere fact that we are always on the agenda of the EU makes it difficult for us to attract foreign direct investment in the same manner all other countries do. And we are saying, really, if one looks at the context under which the sanctions were imposed, those same conditions are no longer prevailing. There is no need for us to be under sanctions. There was a dispute earlier on in 2001 after the presidential elections, but the same situation is drastically changed. We are under a new leadership where our leader has opened up and they said Zimbabwe is open for business, is reforming everything, all complaints anyone has, and is ready to listen, is a listening leader. And we are saying, whatever the misunderstandings we had in 2001, this is no longer the situation, and these sanctions need to be removed. Zimbabwe needs to play its role in the international community as a member of the family of nations, just like any other country in Africa. The entire SADC region is behind Zimbabwe and saying the sanctions must be removed. And we are simply saying, why are those two international institutions, the European Union and the United States of America, continuing to impose these sanctions on Zimbabwe? Every right-thinking Zimbabwean who agree that the President Idi Mnangagwa is engaging. He has opened debate. He has invited even the MDC Alliance to say, please come to the forum where we can discuss and engage. And if there are any issues which require improvement, allow the Zimbabwean people to discuss amongst themselves. And we do not need these sanctions in order for us to develop our country. I think I'll end here for now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mangwana, for your very brief intervention. I'll hand over to the next speaker. Jacob. Honorable Mafume.
Yes, sorry, I was struggling to unmute. Okay, I've noted what the previous speaker has spoken about in relation to the restrictive measures as they were. And I will go back, or I will refer largely to the policy that the current government under Sibusisivo Moyo had adopted. May his soul rest in peace. If you look at the NDS-1, and which was carried over into the NDS-2, it clearly gives an analysis as to the dispute that the government of Zimbabwe has with the international community and various international actors. And what it identifies in its text are issues around issues around the genesis of its dispute, and it puts it squarely on itself to re-engage with the international community, and they call it re-engagement. And they set up steps that they have to do in order to re-engage after an analysis of why we are in this position. They go back to the issues of how the land reform was conducted, issues of human rights violations, issues that relate to arrears with the IMF, issues that relate to internal policies in relation to international community, a lack of a clear plan, as they say, of how to engage with the international community, and a lack of a clear communication channel. And one of the issues that highlights the problem is the current dispute at the Beit Bridge border post. The trucks are piling up right up to Messina because of unilateral changes of policy within Zimbabwe. And in the NDS, ironically, this kind of communication is identified as one of the issues that led to the problems with the international community. And then it lays down a number of key deliverables that the government has to do if it calls itself a new government, as Honorable Mangwana has said. It said we are changing the way we're engaging with the international community. One of the issues that it then says, it says, one, we need to accelerate rejoining the Commonwealth. Where is that process at the current moment? We had some noises about it, but where has it ended? It then also identified that it needed to accelerate communication with the IMF and to deal with its arrears with the IMF in order to go around the doing business or open for business mantra. Where is that program? How far are they with the arrears with the IMF? And how have they dealt with the arrears of the IMF? It also deals with the issues of BIPAs, bilateral agreements, to renew them and to re-strengthen them. And one of the disputes was the issue that BIPAs were violated. And it says that we need to strengthen the bilateral engagement with the various international partners. And it's right there in the NDS. Where is the government with that key deliverable? It then also points out the issue of realignment of the laws with the new constitution. It says that we need to realign the constitution so that we are able to produce and introduce a good governance framework. Where are we with the realignment of the constitution? And we are far behind. Devolution has not been implemented since it was promulgated. The monitoring of the security sector has not been done, and yet that office was created. The various issues around implementing the constitution, realigning the constitution, voter registration. I know a cabinet committee was set up. It has not gone anywhere. The number of bills that are needed to do the realignment with the new constitutions 20 years after that constitution was implemented have not moved from where they were. It identifies that they also need to implement a human rights framework that allows them to deal with issues of abuse. That is rapidly going helter-skelter. If you look at what has happened to our president of the party, he has been barred from entering certain spaces by individuals wearing Honorable Mangwana's party regalia. The police have stood by doing nothing. He has been chased around across the whole of the rural areas that he has visited.
Jacob, you're freezing up there.
He has denied access, he shot it. So we are rapidly going back to the toxic politics that then resulted in this thing. And one of the key things that the NDS speaks about is moving towards economic diplomacy, as they call it. How far are they with that economic diplomacy initiative when the Beitbridge border post can be closed because of a unilateral arrangement? Where are they with the many issues around the economic policy frameworks that they need to put? The transparency in the mining sector. We are now increasingly going back to direct contracting instead of open tender. So the roads are now being done by direct contracting by government. Various contracts are being announced on a daily basis through direct contracting without tendering. And this then creates the same problem. Ironically, maybe it's a pity that the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sibusisi Omoyo, unfortunately passed away when he did, because everything that they need to do is outlined in the NDS. And if they implement the NDS to the letter or to the spirit, they will be able to open up bilateral engagement and international engagement with the international community. It's a pity that after having correctly diagnosed the problem, having correctly diagnosed the solutions, they are now failing hopelessly to implement clear solutions that they themselves have said that if they implement, they will be able to re-engage with the international community. So I would want to dispel all notions that it is the opposition that is causing the lack of the re-engagement, that it is us or our contributions that is causing the lack of re-engagement. We are not. If they implement what's in the national development policy that they've issued voluntarily, we will also benefit as the opposition. They, as the ruling party, will also benefit. The whole country will benefit, because that is a very clear outline on how the international community. Thank you. I hope that answers the question of where to go and why the sanctions or restrictive measures are there. It's all in the NDS. The solutions are all in the NDS. And if implemented, we will all have a good life in Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Honorable Mafume, for your more extended response to the issues. Let me move over to the discussants. The first, Janet Joe from ZimCon. Janet, are you with us? Janet, are you there?
Yes, Prof, I'm here.
Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity that you have given me, SALO, and greetings to everyone and to our speakers, Honorable Mangwana and His Excellency, Honorable Mafume. So we thank you for this conversation, which is very important for Zimbabwe, and particularly at the moment when we have the UN Special Rapporteur in the country doing her assessment on the impact of unilateral sanctions on the human rights, livelihoods of people. And as Zimbabwe, as you have noted, we have the ZEDERA and the EU restrictive measures, but of course that have been relaxed and reviewed a number of times. And the sanctions narrative has therefore gone on since 2001 up to now. But I remember in 2017, the President Idi Mnangagwa at the National Sports Stadium made a profound speech in which he stated that the sanctions narrative and the blame game was over. And of course, we needed to re-engage with the international community, but we also needed to find each other. That is the people of Zimbabwe, business, the international community and the government, to ensure that we transform our economy, we transform our politics, and we move together towards economic recovery and a just and equal society. But since then, I think things have changed. And we saw in 2019 at the SADC heads of state and government in Tanzania, in
Janet, we can't hear you. We're losing you. Hello, Janet?
Maybe we should move to the next speaker. Yeah, I'm not hearing her. Prof, maybe we should move on.
All right. I think until we can always come back to Janet. There may be a problem with her connection. Hopewell, can we move on to you? Hopewell is a highly respected journalist whose work has uncovered areas of corruption within the Zimbabwe state. And I'm looking forward to hearing his take on the sanctions issue. Hopewell, over to you.
Prof. Hopewell was just in, but he seems to be out now. I don't know what happened.
Okay. So who's in at the moment?
Maybe we can go to Tapiwa next.
Okay, Tapiwa Chiriga, are you there? Zinasu? Tapiwa,
thank you very much. Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, please come in.
Yes, please come in. Maybe if I could just say this in brief, I would want to quote the leader of the War Veterans Association in Zimbabwe and equally a senior ZANU-PF member who said that you cannot continue blaming sanctions. That was Mr. Christopher Mchangwa, the leader of the War Veterans Association in 2017. He said that you cannot continue blaming sanctions for what is happening in this country. And if you think that sanctions are the biggest cause of our problems, and if you cannot find a way to navigate around them, then you should simply second the leadership. That was Christopher Mchangwa in 2017. Now, back to the sanctions and the terrible situation that we find ourselves in here in Zimbabwe. We must also look at what Janet was saying about the speech that was made by Mr. Emmerson Mnangagwa, the President of the Republic, in 2017 when he assumed office, and even between 2017 and 2019, when he said that the sanctions game was over. We should not continue talking about that, but move on to make sure that we re-engage this country.
Sorry, Tapiwa, there's an echo from our side. I think everyone else is experiencing it also. It might be your earphones or your connection. I'm not sure. Are you able to fix it?
Let me come back after someone else. As I fix it, I'll come back.
Okay,
Got
thank you.
anybody else?
Prof, I think I see Dewa is in.
Okay,
I
Dewa.
think we can go.
I'm connected if I still have an opportunity.
Okay, yes, Janet, carry on.
Yes. I don't know where I lost my network, but I was at the point where I was saying that with regards to re-engagement with the international community, we know that we also then disqualified ourselves when we got into arrears and we were defaulting. But I will not really go deep into whether the sanctions have had an impact on the citizens, on business and everything. I think the government has been able to and eloquent in highlighting how those have impacted the AU and the SADC region. They have done that on behalf of Zimbabwe. But I wanted to just refer to the issues, the day-to-day lived experiences of Zimbabweans with regards to how the government has not addressed our economic environment, which has scared away capital, by the way. Capital is shy and it's also very timid. We continue having a volatile and unpredictable, a complex and ambiguous economic environment, which has been created by policy dissonance, the corruption that we have seen, and impunity that we have experienced and seen in Zimbabwe. And this impunity is very clear in terms of how the institutions have not been able to hold accountable those that are found with their hands in the cookie jar, stealing public funds or misusing and abusing public funds that could be used for public service delivery, that could be used for the fulfillment of constitutional, social, and economic rights. But this has not been so because certain individuals are actually benefiting. If you check at the World Bank report as an example, inequalities are increasing in Zimbabwe. The majority are now in extreme poverty, 49%. Only a few actually are having their purchasing power and their wealth increasing by 25% in just, I think, about 2 years. So you see that that elite, if you trace how they are benefiting, it is a very deliberate connivance between the government and the political elite. So there is an interaction of politics and economy, and the economy, or the economic elite, in terms of swindling and stealing public funds, which could then be used to ensure that livelihoods for the people of Zimbabwe are enhanced. We have the issue of state party military conflation, which for me, I think is a big issue, bigger than the sanctions, which has created a governance crisis, state capture, which has also then resultantly seen the loss of identity and capacity of our government and the state to respond to our crisis, which has gone on for decades, as we have said. We also have a developmental crisis or economic model because of this state capture and the deep state that we are currently experiencing in Zimbabwe. Therefore, the issue of rights deficit or an economy that is very rights light is what we are experiencing. And when we look at some of the conditions that we have to then fulfill, like giving voice, to development, is a key issue if we are talking about development as freedom. So what I see, I think we continue to talk about economic growth that the government has been trying to put in place, how things have improved, but without looking at how has that growth ensured that there is no joblessness, there is no futureless growth, there is no rootless growth, there is no voiceless growth. So I think these are issues that we need to address and to grapple with when we are talking about our developmental economic crisis that we are currently facing, which is outside the issue of sanctions. Once we do that, I think we then can deal with our endangered future, our endangered economy, because of the state capture and the deep crisis that we are currently facing. And I believe that our own dialogue and consultations on the ground in terms of how to implement economic reforms that are far-reaching in terms of transforming people's livelihoods, and political reforms that will give a voice and ensure that development is actually freedom, will enhance our capacity to be able to harness our domestic resources, but to also re-engage with the international community as Zimbabweans. I think from the social contract perspective, where we will give each other guarantees that we will be accountable to one another. The government will be accountable to those that give them the mandate, and to the promises that they do make to the citizens. So I would end there and still refer to the president's remarks and speech, his inaugural speech, that we need to also internally look at how we've contributed in this crisis, even as we re-engage with the international community. And for me, I think the issues of maladministration, impunity, lack of capacity for domestic resource mobilization because of the state capture have been key in terms of contributing to the crisis that we are currently facing. And that conversation has to be put on the table when we are discussing this issue of sanctions on Zimbabwe. Thank you, Prof. I hand over back the mic to you.
Thank you, Janet. That was also very clear, very interesting. And I just, for everybody's information, Janet published a piece in the Daily Maverick yesterday called "Corruption and State Capture, Not Sanctions, Are the Cause of Zimbabwe's Economic Meltdown." If either Louis or Janet has that link, please put it on the chat for others to see. With that, let me move to the next speaker, Hopewell Chinono. Hopewell, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me, Prof?
Yes, I can. Hopewell is an independent journalist who has uncovered major examples of corruption in the Zimbabwe state. And so let me hand over to Hopewell.
Thank you, Prof, and good morning to everyone and the people that are watching. You know, the sanctions that were imposed in 2001 were as a result of a few things that were taking place in our country. Amongst them was the use of violence as a tool of choice in settling political disputes, the rigging of elections, the abuse of the rule of law, and of course, there was the issue of land as well. So we moved on for years, and we got to 2017, where we had a coup. But I would like to respond to a few things that have been said by speakers. I'll start with Mr. Mnyaradzi Mangwana from ZANU-PF. He said that the sanctions were used or supposed to be used as a tool to veto financial assistance to Zimbabwe. This has never actually happened. It's an option that is there on the table, but it has never happened. Why has it never happened? It's because Zimbabwe stopped servicing its debts. And in 1999, that is when Zimbabwe lost its good relationship with the World Bank and the IMF. So when you borrow money from a bank and you don't repay the money, it's not sanctions, it is just good banking practices. And that's what actually happened. I know that a lot of our friends in ZANU-PF like using this as an example, but we need to set the record straight that there's never been a time when the veto through the World Bank or the IMF has ever been used by the United States of America, because Zimbabwe could naturally not borrow money before the sanctions were implemented. And this happened in 1999 when we went into the Democratic Republic of Congo adventure and we blew billions that we didn't have, and we ended up not being able to service our debts. Fast forward to 2018, President Mnangagwa said that sanctions were not the issue. In 2017, one of the senior members of the ZANU-PF political party, Mr. Chris Mchangwa, said sanctions were not the issue. The issue was bad governance. And whilst President Mnangagwa was saying this, he also said that it was important for Zimbabweans to engage with the rest of the world in order to normalize relations, because all the blame was being put on Robert Mugabe, and the current government was refashioning itself as the new dispensation, as the Second Republic. But in terms of behavior, there was no Second Republic to talk of. In terms of how it was doing business, there was no new dispensation to talk about. Why do I say so? Because the continued use of violence is still with us today. It's still with us today to a point where we saw it just yesterday. In Manicaland and in Mashingo, we saw it last week, where the opposition leader of Zimbabwe, Nelson Chamisa, had his cars vandalized, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And there was a reported assassination that was meant to happen, a failed assassination. So when these things are happening in a country that fashions itself as a democracy, other countries have a right to determine how they engage with you. And that engagement is based on shared values. Now, to say that the MDC is responsible for sanctions is intellectually dishonest, because the MDC does not determine the foreign policy of America or the foreign policy of EU countries. If it were that easy, the MDC would have been in power today, because it would have ordered the United States of America to get rid of this government using military force. So we know that it's not true. ZANU-PF knows that it's not true, but it's good fodder for propaganda when they're speaking to people who are either not well read in terms of these issues, or their supporters who just lap up to everything. Now, Mr. Mangwana spoke about US companies not coming to Zimbabwe. Actually, we have US companies in this country. John Deere is a US company, is here. The president actually went to receive tractors from John Deere. US companies have taken part in our tender processes. GE Electric, one of the biggest electric companies in the world, they took part in a tender process. They won the tender process. It was taken away from them. It was given to Mr. Kudata Gray, who is the front for the looting of public funds in Zimbabwe for ZANU-PF political elites. This is on the record. This is something that we cannot dispute, and neither can ZANU-PF dispute, because it's actually on the record. And then the issue of doing business. One of the biggest supermarkets, people just don't know because it was not reported. One of the biggest supermarkets in the world, Walmart, they came here. They wanted to do business here in Zimbabwe. They left, they didn't do business. It's an American company. They didn't do business because huge bribes were demanded. Mr. Mangwana is aware of this. Walmart was here. The CEO flew in with a private jet. Huge bribes were demanded. The media hasn't just reported about it. So to say that US companies are not doing business in Zimbabwe because of sanctions is disingenuous. It's because the economic environment does not allow any company, not just US company, to come and do business in Zimbabwe, where policy is changing every day, where there is no local currency, where if the government decides that it's going to use the US dollar, tomorrow it will wake up and say the US dollar is now equivalent to electronic currency, or which is called RTGS. It keeps changing. So it's difficult to do business in a country where you can't even repatriate your profits. And Mr. Mangwana is aware of this. He's not dumb, he's a lawyer. So I assume that he's a clever guy. And in terms of the land reform, it is one of the things that was demanded, that land taken away from what commercial farmers must be paid for. And the interesting thing is that the notion of sanctions is not rooted just in land. It's rooted on rule of law. It's rooted in corruption. It's rooted on doing an investigation on where Itai Zamara went. And all these things don't require money. But the government of Zimbabwe, the government led by Emmerson Mnangagwa, decided to deal with the land issue. They think that if they deal with the land issue, the sanctions will go away. I've got news for them. The sanctions will not go away because they've paid white farmers, because the sanctions were not just about land. They were about how our government relates with its own citizens. The realignment of laws, the constitution, which Mr. Mangwana worked so hard with his colleagues in MDC to make sure that it came to fruition. Mr. Mangwana is iconized in a documentary film which has been watched worldwide. That constitution that you worked so hard to make sure that it came to fruition has not been implemented. And all the things that are being asked for in the sanctions demands by the Americans and by the Europeans are found and located in that very constitution in which Mr. Mangwana was one of the people who were pioneering it. And they made sure that it saw the light of day. What is wrong with aligning the laws of the country with the constitution? And to give a good example, Prof, I was arrested on the 8th of January for a crime that I didn't do, but we'll put that aside. But more importantly, Mr. Mangwana would know this. I was arrested using a law that does not exist. And I was sent to prison, to Chikurubi, and spent 20 days there under a law that does not exist. And this is because the constitution has not been aligned. There are old laws that have not been aligned. My case had to be resolved in the High Court when the High Court quashed it and said this law does not exist. But this would not have happened if the laws had been aligned. And I'm glad that we have got Mr. Mangwana, who is a lawyer, and Mr. Mafume, who is a lawyer. They can actually speak into these issues because they are experts, they are trained lawyers. Then we have the issue of post-election violence. Every election, people are beaten up. I made a documentary film called A Violent Response in 2008, where over 300 Zimbabweans were murdered by Mr. Mangwana's party with the assistance of state organs. This is what attracts sanctions. No sane Zimbabwean, as Mr. Mangwana said, would want sanctions to be imposed on their own country, not even on politicians that we don't like. It's unnecessary. It does not add any value. As we have seen, these sanctions have not helped us in any way as citizens. But these are sanctions that have been imposed by a foreign power, and we have no control over what a foreign power does. So some of the sanctions include the travel ban and the fact that the Zimbabwean government cannot buy military hardware from the EU or from the United States, and there's an asset freeze. There's a big politician whom I know has got 12 million in America and a property in Miami, which was frozen. ZANU-PF knows this. There are many others. We don't have to go into personal details, but I'm just saying this to give an understanding of what these measures are about. Now, there are institutions that have been penalized, and these institutions include banks like CBZ and Barclays. They have been penalized because they violated these sanctions by transacting with individuals that were on sanctions. I think it would be disingenuous to say Barclays or CBZ was specifically targeted because of sanctions. No, they violated a law which was in place, and they knew that they were not supposed to do this. And thankfully, I think those issues have been resolved between the American government and those institutions. Now, when we look at the issue of corruption, I've always argued that corruption is the real issue that I wish my brother, Mr. Mangwana, and his members in ZANU-PF would really take a hold of. Now, I'll give you a good example. All central hospitals in Zimbabwe, 6 of them, they only require $50 million to run. If you ask Mr. Mangwana why we don't have paracetamol at Parenyatwa today, as we don't, and why we don't have paracetamol at Harare Hospital today, as we don't, he will say sanctions. But here's the thing. We only need 50 million for the 6 central hospitals to run smoothly with all that they need and treating their patients without turning people back. The other argument is that we are losing gold, which is being smuggled by ZANU-PF political elites and their surrogates, worth $100 million every month. Some of this gold is being smuggled from, is being looted from state companies. Now, if gold alone worth $100 million is being looted from Zimbabwe every month. And this is a government figure, by the way. It's not a figure that's been given by us. It is the government, so it's conservative. It could be more. There were the evidence has been there. Henrietta Rishwaya, who's a member of ZANU-PF, was caught with 6 kilograms of gold. When I reported the corrupt activity that was taking place around that case, I was arrested, and yet I was exposing corruption. I was arrested, I went and I spent 23 days in Chikurube. Those are the things that attract sanctions. Now, if $100 million worth of gold is being smuggled every month, how can you blame sanctions when that same amount could run all the central hospitals for 2 years? What could run the central hospitals for 2 years is being looted in 1 month. And then the political elites in ZANU-PF, they blame sanctions. The previous president, Robert Mugabe, he said, put it on the record, that 15 billion worth of diamonds had been looted from Chiazwa. Now 15 billion would run all our central hospitals for 350 years. Now, how can anyone sensible blame sanctions for economic destruction when we have blown 15 billion that would run our schools, that would run our hospitals, that would fix our roads? Today, we have the ZINARA, which is a state agent that collects taxes, road taxes on behalf of government. It collects millions. ZANU-PF does not invest in those roads. What does it do? It goes and buys planes from Malaysia. It goes and gives huge packs of 15,000 for hair allowance for their workers. And then when we complain about the potholes on the roads, they blame sanctions.
Okay,
so I will stop the program.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that detailed intervention. I'm going to move now to Dewa Mawinga from Human Rights Watch. Dewa, are you with us?
Yes,
Dewa?
Prof.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prof. And
you got 7 minutes, eh?
Okay, I know that's plenty. And I want to just agree with the previous speakers, particularly with Janet and with Hope Chingona in terms of their submissions. The challenge really is that the ZANU-PF government does not want to be forthright and honest about number one, about human rights abuses, which are linked to targeted sanctions. Number two, about the impact of corruption on the economy. And number three, about the failure of the systems, the justice systems in Zimbabwe to deliver effective remedies for victims of abuses. As a result, the government is now using sanctions as an excuse, as a ruse. Sorry, can I continue?
Yeah, sorry, the person is muted.
Hello?
Yes, continue.
Can I interrupt? I think this is an unfair panel. You have a one-sided panel. If you want to have a monologue, I'm moving. I'm the only speaker from ZANU-PF against 4 now already on one side. If this is a monologue, I'm not participating anymore.
Mr. Mangwana, can I just say, we also invited the MDC.
I will not participate in a one-sided show, which is a monologue. If you've decided to choose people who are supporting one side, then it's not a discussion. I'm pulling out, I'm sorry.
Can you hold on, Mr. Mangwana? We also invited MDC.
No, I'm not going to continue participating in a one-sided show. Whenever you want us to debate as ZANU-PF, make sure that we have a balanced panel. We cannot continue like this.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think anyway, just carry on, Dewa.
Yes, I think this is the challenge that we have ZANU-PF using sanctions as a ruse, and then now seeking to get anyone and everyone who can blame sanctions as the basis for the collapse of the economy, when the government is failing to rein in corruption, to hold accountable the criminals with political connections in Zimbabwe who are looting state resources. So where there is no remedy, there are other states, the international community, who have stepped in to demand accountability. So, for example, there is well-documented corruption that has been exposed, including by Wopol and others, around the former health minister Obadiah Moyo and the $60 million loot. Also around Kudakwashi Tagwirei, Command Agriculture and his companies, and links to the Minister of Finance. So all those things have not been addressed, and the government still insists that the problem has to do with sanctions. If the government was sincere, then it would have focused on its promises as ZANU-PF went into the July 2018 elections. It had made undertakings to address these issues. But the failure to address these issues is now what is coming back to bite the ZANU-PF government. So from where I sit, particularly the issues of human rights abuses, on the 1st of August 2018, 6 people were shot and killed. And President Mnangagwa put a commission of inquiry that found that the police and the army were responsible for those killings and recommended that those responsible should be held accountable. That commission of inquiry report was not implemented. The people were not held accountable. And the individuals in the security sector responsible for the police, for the military operation, the Minister of State, were placed on sanctions. So these are the things that the government needs to address. The things are known and clear. There is no point in seeking a public relations exercise about the position of sanctions without addressing the fundamentals, the issues on the ground that can revive the economy and that can address the human rights abuses and take the country forward. Zimbabwe will not move forward on the basis of propaganda, on the basis of shouting about sanctions. It will move forward on the basis of good governance, on the basis of the rule of law, on the basis of decisively tackling corruption, and on the basis of respecting human rights and the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Dera. It's unfortunate that Mr. Mangwana has pulled out of the discussion, but that's his right to do so. Louis, have we got any more of the discussants with us?
I think if we can try go back to Tapiwa, see if his audio is working.
Okay, Tapiwa, are you with us?
Thank you, Prof.
Please go ahead.
Am I now audible?
Yes.
Maybe it's a pity that Mr. Mangwana since left. We were looking forward to a progressive and constructive discussion with him and every other Zimbabwean in this country, but of course he still retains that right to do so. But maybe just to add to what the brilliant speakers that spoke before me said, we cannot speak of engaging the outside world before we speak of engaging the citizens. As long as there is a lack of social contract in Zimbabwe between the government and the governing, there is always going to be discord, and sanctions will always be there. Why am I saying that? The conditions for the removal of the sanctions are related to democracy, are related to good governance, and are related to the government of Zimbabwe stopping the harassment of student leaders, stopping the harassment of journalists, stopping the harassment of dissenting voices, and stopping the harassment of political opponents during elections. I, for example, spent a week in prison for holding a press conference demanding the release of Obakombora's division. So that means there is simply no contract, no social contract between myself and the people who purport to be in government, in the same government of my country. So as long as Mr. Mnangagwa continues to think that he can engage the United States of America before he can engage respectfully with me as a citizen, with the next person as a citizen, then we are not going anywhere. And as long as we do not address the biggest sanction that we have in this country, which is corruption, then we are not going anywhere. Sanctions can be removed tomorrow morning, but we will still continue suffering. So we have a problem where we have a government that vacillates like a pendulum. It plays pendulum politics in as far as sanctions are concerned. When Mr. Mnangagwa got in, he promised us that he was going to engage the West, he was going to engage the East, he was going to engage every country in this world to make sure that the relations had normalized. Those countries gave him a specific set of conditions around the holding of free elections, the respect for dissenting voices, and the respect for the constitution and democracy. That is simply not happened. Opo here was saying that he was arrested for a charge that does not exist in Zimbabwean law. I was arrested for holding a press conference, a mere press conference. Many people have been arrested and harassed, persecuted, tortured, and abducted. Some have even died. Just even soon after the August 1, the July elections in 2018. We right now have seen the leader of the opposition being attacked. We have seen allegations that he has been attacked even by guns and bullet holes seen on his vehicle. So we cannot speak of engaging Mr. Joe Biden in America. We cannot speak of engaging Boris Johnson before we can engage on our own as Zimbabweans, respectfully, truthfully, and even as much as we can disagree. So we can speak of sanctions all day, but the biggest sanction that exists in this country is the polarization of our politics, and the second is the looting and corruption that is done by politically exposed persons. So the conditions for the removal of sanctions are not that bad at all. One of the most controversial reasons why sanctions were imposed was land. But I mean, the Zimbabwean government itself has even offered to pay these former white farmers in Zimbabwe. So the other conditions speak to democracy, the rule of law, and they speak to respecting what is written in the Zimbabwean constitution, a constitution that was voted for by more than 95% of our population. So there is nothing hard or difficult that needs to be done for sanctions to go. But it is a matter of political will. It is a matter of people knowing fully that there is a serious difference between the state and the governing party, and that power retention politics do not work. But what works is making sure that we pursue development, we pursue good governance, we pursue democracy and the rule of law for the benefit of every citizen in this country. So our message is very simple. Let us pursue good governance. Let us pursue constitutionalism. Let us pursue the rule of law. Let us make sure that our politics, our economics, and every other aspect of our governance speaks to the material conditions and practical realities of our people. Let us stop this harassment of student activists. I still don't know why I went to prison. I still don't know why my president is in and out of prison. A week ago, our own general council meeting was invaded by riot police and they arrested 6 of our members in a democratic Zimbabwe. So as long as we have a chancellor in the form of Mr. Mnangagwa, who does not respect the activities of student unionism and activism and leadership, then we have a problem. We cannot try and project a good picture out there for engagement purposes to other countries where we do not seem to have a good picture of ourselves at home. It's more like a father who beats up his children and goes around saying, please be good to me, I'm a good father out there. Let us have good relations within ourselves, political tolerance, and cease political violence, and make sure that we engage truthfully and practice good governance, and then we can speak of sanctions because our country will already be doing well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tapiwa. I think that's all the discussions we have now presented. I'm going to open it up to the floor. I see Rutendo, his hand is up. I'll hand over to you, Rutendo.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. One of the biggest areas that I have had a problem with as an anti-sanctions activist is that we have the Europeans, or at least the European Union and the Americans telling us that they are policemen of human rights, yet they created a multilateral institution that is supposed to be responsible for catering for human rights through the Human Rights Council of the UN. And secondly, they tell us that they are dealing with human rights issues and punishing people in Zimbabwe for violating human rights, yet they never undertook any trial of the people that they are punishing with sanctions. So this is basically punishment without trial. And for those that are targeted, who have not been tried and are being punished by sanctions, that makes us question if the EU, the Americans, including yourselves, are not ignoring the Bill of Rights that says that people must be tried. They must be tried by a competent court. They must be tried based on a law that already exists. And they must be tried by courts and people that have jurisdiction to actually undertake the trial. So when the Europeans, your country included, accepted to punish Zimbabweans with sanctions without trying them, on what basis were you punishing people without trial? On what basis did you find people guilty to deserve the punishment of the holding of their property, the denial of their rights to travel, the denial of their business, and denial of development? Then we leave that and we go to the fact that sanctions are collectively punishing all Zimbabweans, depriving Zimbabweans of their enjoyment of their human rights. And we say, if you are defending the rights of these so-called Zimbabweans, then how do you punish civilians with sanctions that blockade trade, that blockade travel, that actually cripple the business people and entrepreneurs who invest in Zimbabwe, who are supposed to create jobs in Zimbabwe? How do you target the parastatals of the country that are supposed to deliver services to the people of Zimbabwe? How do you target the government of Zimbabwe? How do you let the Americans do that? And you condone it and you don't condemn this collective punishment of Zimbabweans. And yet, in your own, in a law that was made for war, during the Second World War, the Geneva Convention, there was an agreement by your European states that people, civilians, will not be punished collectively, disproportionately, and unreasonably, even in a war, where in peacetime, Zimbabweans are suffering for the past 20 years, collectively being punished. The UN Human Rights Council has accepted that this is the case. They have said that unilateral sanctions are illegal, but the Europeans have supported the Americans in this imposition of this war. And to some extent, we are beginning to believe that we can even classify these sanctions as genocide because they have killed a number of our people due to hunger, lack of water, lack of healthcare, lack of emergency services, and lack of economic development. And you would understand that from the meaning of genocide that has been put into international law, any intentional attempt to kill a part or a whole of a people is genocide. How is it that a Scandinavian country such as yours has allowed this to happen? You've been silent in the UN. You've been silent in the Human Rights Council. You've been silent internationally while Zimbabweans have been punished by this warfare. It's the same thing you did during colonialism. You were quiet when colonialism were happening. You were beneficiaries. Your industries were developed because of the EEC's development of the pillage and exploitation of Africa. When reparations were not paid for colonialism, you were quiet. And yet you say you're Scandinavians, you're beyond corruption, you're beyond all these bigotry. My question is, why have you been silent? Through 400 years of slavery, you were silent. You even had your own territories that you exploited through slavery. You benefited from an African economy that was enslaving Africa. And now my question to you before I depart is, are you people the kind of people that understand humanity? Do you understand human rights? Do you enforce what it is that you preach, or you pretend to be policemen of human rights when you're actually part and parcel of the problem and injustice upon African countries and the exploitation of African countries through slavery, colonialism, and now wars for resources like we saw in Iran and Iraq, which were also under US sanctions. And now sanctions in a country like Zimbabwe, hoping it to break it up again to also impute a war or intervention as we've seen before. Please, can you tell us why you are involved in this, but yet you say you are non-corrupt, you're Scandinavians, you are people who believe in rule of law. Why have you let this happen for 20 years? And will you continue to allow this? And I heard the gentleman who just went now saying that reforms must happen in Zimbabwe. But what we are trying to ask, particularly members of the MDC, that gentleman is a member of the MDC. There was a deliberate attempt, agreements and documents that prove that the United Kingdom, the United States and the MDC conspired to impose sanctions on Zimbabwe so that the sanctions would collectively punish the Zimbabwean people, make them uncomfortable, deprive them of water, food, healthcare, education, so that those people would be forced to vote for MDC. This has been the case since 2001 till to date. The constitution that was written in Zimbabwe was written by MPs of the MDC and ZANU-PF. MDC elected into our parliament through the sanctions. So they used the crime against humanity to terrorize the Zimbabwean people, to vote for MDC. MDC then formed COPAC that created our constitution. Not only was COPAC created through the duress of sanctions, COPAC was also created through the threat of military action in 2008, when Nelson Mandela, Gracia Machel, and Kofi Annan were sent as the elders to Harare to force Mugabe to form a unity government. It is that unity government that then created COPAC, that then created our constitution. Now, my question is, if the constitution was created under duress of sanctions, if the constitution was created by members of parliament who had come into parliament by the use of sanctions, a crime against humanity, these are criminals that are sitting in our parliament. So our parliament is created by criminals who are under the duress of sanctions. So the question is that constitution a Zimbabwean constitution? Is that constitution?
Can you wind up, please, Lieutenant?
Can that constitution be deemed to be consensus ad idem of the Zimbabwean people, or it is consensus ad idem of the sanction senders and the criminals of MDC who came in? So do we have a right to implement a constitution that is created by terrorism and by violations of human rights?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your intervention. Let me open it up to others who want to talk. Any other questions, comments, responses? Yes, Brian Manicom.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think when we look at the issue of sanctions, we also need to go back to the basics and ask what have sanctions achieved for a decade or so now? What do they continue to achieve? The intention of the sanctions was to put pressure on the government of the day, was intended to hold accountable people accused and believed largely to have been very involved in corruption and crippling the economy of Zimbabwe for private benefit. Having said that, the opposition has frequently found itself in a conundrum where on one hand, they are not truly embracing the call for sanctions. On the other hand, they seem to be motivating sanctions behind the scene. The ruling party, the ZANU-PF political party, claim that the sanctions are having a very serious effect on them and on the country. The MDC claim that the sanctions are not having a serious effect on the country. So therefore, what is the purpose of the opposition continuing to support sanctions when the claim is that the sanctions are targeted and don't affect the economy as a whole? And they give a lot of legitimacy to the ruling party, which claim that the sanctions are a source of serious problems and economic difficulties affecting the ability to rebuild. So I guess what I'm saying is back to the basics. What was the purpose of calling for the sanctions initially? What has been achieved through the sanctions for the MDC, for civil society, for Zimbabwe, for ZANU-PF for that matter? And what is the benefit of maintaining sanctions, considering these possible contradictions? And I'm saying this as a question because I'm mindful of the fact that the speakers from both sides of this debate have very strong views and are experts on the matter. But I struggle currently to see even the political value for the MDC to continue to support sanctions as such. So I think to me, why sanctions, and are they able to achieve what intended outcome at the moment? Is there a need for this disagreement? Is there a need for this debate to go on forever? Or is there a breaking point, and are we past that breaking point already? And I'm not even sure that it would negatively affect the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Bram. Thank you, Bram. Anybody else want to come in? The floor is open.
Can I come in, Prof?
Sure, come in, Hope.
Yeah, I just want to respond to a few things that have been raised by Rutendo. I want to start by correcting that Nelson Mandela never came to Zimbabwe in 2008, like was dealing with the issue of post-election violence and the issues that arose from the disputed election of March 29 was actually Thabo Mbeki, not Nelson Mandela. And COPAC was not created through terrorism, as he's saying. COPAC was a creation that was put on the table by both ZANU-PF and the MDC. So this was an agreement, unless if he's saying that ZANU-PF has become illegitimate or was illegitimate at the time and had no right to participate. These are things that were agreed by the two political parties. So I'll cut through the rhetoric and get to the real issues. He raised an issue of the United States being a policeman of the world. Well, I don't speak on behalf of the United States of America or Europe, but what I can say is that us Zimbabweans are the ones that have been demanding our government to respect the rule of law and to respect us as citizens. You can not live in a country where you are not so sure whether you end up in prison for simply exposing corruption and the evidence there on the ground. If he wants to have honest discussions about these things, this is quite possible, but it becomes difficult when we are in an intellectual discussion and then we end up being subjected to rhetoric. He talks about trials. Well, it's not the responsibility again of the Zimbabwean government, of the Zimbabwean people to put their leaders on trial. We don't have that capacity. I'm sure if we had, we would have loved to do so. He knows that the people have been killed. He knows that people have been raped, abducted, both under the first dispensation and this so-called new dispensation. This has happened. He talks about development. Well, I'll go back to my argument, which says that financially, the argument of sanctions should be settled by figures, not by rhetoric. As I said before, every month, according to the Zimbabwean government, not according to us, according to the Zimbabwean government, its conservative figure is that $100 million worth of gold is being smuggled. And we have exposed who the people that are doing this. $100 million would fix the health problems that he talked about. As I said earlier, all our central hospitals in Zimbabwe only require $50 million. So we are losing money that could run all our central hospitals for 2 years is being lost in 1 month. Again, the issue of diamonds, both the present and the previous government agreed that looting took place. So I think it's disingenuous and intellectually dishonest for one to then argue that people don't have medication because of sanctions, when we know that the Ministry of Health, the chairman of the Health Services Board, went into Parliament and actually told us that the government Land Rover Discoveries, one which was costing $200,000. Now, if a Land Rover Discovery is bought, and he told Parliament, if they 250 of those cars. Now, the biggest hospital in Zimbabwe is Harare Hospital, now renamed Salim Gabe Hospital. It has only 2 maternity theaters that are there. Only one of them is working. They were built in 1977 by the colonial government. The present government has not built a single maternity theater at the biggest hospital in the country. 2,500 women are dying every year because there are no maternity theaters. Yet one Land Rover Discovery will build a maternity theater. So for us to blame sanctions for things that we can actually do ourselves, and we prove time and time again, as I'm doing, that the resources are there. Zimbabwe has got over 40 minerals, gold, platinum, diamonds, you name it. And where is the money going? Zimbabwe has not been stopped to trade with the rest of the world. We don't have a trade embargo like what Ian Smith had during the colonial times. We are allowed today, if you go to Tesco's in London, you will find blueberries from Zimbabwe. If you go to America today, you will find blueberries from Zimbabwe. We are trading with the rest of the world. In fact, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe does billion-dollar business sending money to the United States of America. It receives money through banks from the United States of America. So it's disingenuous to say that we're not trading because of that. As I mentioned earlier, the CEO of Walmart flew into this country under this present government with a private jet, wanted to set up supermarkets here, but they demanded bribes. So for us to then come and blame sanctions is disingenuous and intellectually dishonest.
Thanks. Just wind up so we can give others a chance. Thank you. Thank you.
No, I'm done, Prof.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to come in? So any new speakers want to come in?
Can I have a right of reply, Prof?
Not yet.
Or should we give others a chance?
We want to give others a chance. Okay. Anybody else want to come in? Jacob, you want to come in?
Yes, yes, Prof.
Sure.
Yes, thank you, Prof. I think it's very clear what has to happen. It's in the NDS. The government itself has put out a plan. I don't know what Rutendo is talking about. If he reads print on how they are going to solve this situation, he will then be able to understand the steps that they've outlined that needs to be done. The re-engagement with the IMF, re-engagement with the Commonwealth, some of the bodies that they unilaterally got out of. And I think there are certain speakers who do not understand. We do not support sanctions, but what happens is that there are international obligations that a country signs up to, conventions that a country signs up to. Let's take, for example, if you're dealing with financial issues, if you don't sign up to the anti-money laundering statutes, international statutes, what happens to you is automatic. There are certain financial systems, if you don't sign up to them, what happens to you is automatic. So if you are a government and you are in the business of torturing your citizens, closing out the media, doing human rights violations willy-nilly, the consequences are there for all to see. The international community will simply stop engaging with you at various levels. So you cannot do those activities. Torture your people, kill with impunity, chase the opposition leader around the whole country, steal, plunder, and maim at will, and expect the international community not to do something about it. It will happen. History is littered. If you go to videos, you'll see Jobo talking about the Smith government and the need for restrictive measures against the Smith government, the apartheid government. Every government that does things against its own people will suffer the consequences that follow from it doing it. Doesn't need the opposition to say anything, doesn't need the opposition to support such measures for them to be there. So we are not, we are against the behavior of the government that violates the human rights of Zimbabwean people. And that's what we speak about. And when we speak about it, there is a reaction in different quarters and people then react differently. But the government in its own NDS, as I said earlier, has outlined the problem. They have outlined the steps that they have to take. The realignment of the constitution is something that the government has put in place on its own, unless Rutendo is now saying the government that has been put in by the very same constitution is denigrating, is illegitimate. Yes, then he agrees with us. He agrees with us that it has not gotten into place constitutionally. It is not supposed to be there. If he agrees with that, then definitely we welcome him seeing the light. But for him to brush aside a constitution that puts into very existence the same government that he's talking about is both oxymoronic and horribly ironic for him to be saying that, because the very same government is the same government that is saying we need to realign with the constitution, has even gone further to amend sections of the constitution that it doesn't like. And if he says it's criminal, if he says it's a fraud, we welcome him coming to the light. Then definitely that is what we've always said. We've said that they've gotten on without being following the constitution, and Rutendo here confirms that it is a criminal government that was put in place by what he calls the criminal constitution. And I can see he's salivating at the prospects of me agreeing with him that this is a criminal government that was put in, what did he say, was hijacked into power or was forced into power by an illegitimate constitution.
Thanks, Jacob. Janet's coming. Janet. Over to you, Janet.
Thank you, Prof. Just maybe in my, as I conclude, I have to dash out of the meeting now. I just wanted to raise an issue really around this issue of the impact of sanctions in terms of, I think what we have suffered in Zimbabwe is a situation where those that are under sanctions have decided to then put the majority of the citizens under sanctions by corruption, by misuse of public funds, and implementing, I would call them horrible, economic policies that are hinged on austerity, where Zimbabweans have been asked to tighten their belts and suffer austerity. So you see that the public servants, for example, are earning literally nothing, while a few elites amass and go on a rampage in terms of primitive accumulation. So austerity, is an economic model for economic growth, and then the core or the narrative that there is actually economic growth becomes a narrative that we are being given by government, but it is really austerity on the poor and on the majority, the massive number of people in the informal sector through the 2% transactional tax, public servants, like I have indicated, then the issue of no access to public services. But we are tightening our belts on behalf of those that are on sanctions, who are actually loosening their belts because they are eating on our behalf. For me, that is the biggest sanctions that we have to deal with, and we have to be genuine about. So as we continue to tighten under the austerity and then the corruption and the illicit financial flows that we are facing, we are being called to ask for the removal of sanctions as an example. But what guarantees do we get that we are going to get reforms and proper rights respecting, development focused economic policies, democratic policies that will ensure that, we have redistribution of resources. We begin to harness our domestic resources for our own development and building our own agency. I think that is the missing link that we have. That is the conversation that we should be having if we are going to say that sanctions are impacting on us. But for now, it is the sanctions that the few are actually imposing on us when they are eating on our behalf, and they call on austerity. For us, austerity is what is making the citizens in Zimbabwe suffer, because the government doesn't want to mobilize resources for public sector investments, to invest in public services, but they are lining their pockets. They are, aligning with foreign investors, especially from the East, and levying the Consolidated Revenue Fund, for example, by giving harmful tax incentives as an example, but heavily taxing the citizens, rejecting, democratic developmental economic models that will ensure that we redistribute resources, we redistribute the burdens that we are currently facing, the debt burden, the tax burden that most of the citizens are facing, as we are saying that we are implementing economic reforms that are now giving us budget surpluses. What budget surplus are we getting when civil servants don't have a decent wage? What budget surplus are we talking about when we are moving on roads that are potholed? that cannot actually, that are not safe and are claiming lives. If you go on there's a website on life expectancy, road traffic accidents are killing more people than COVID-19 as an example. And we are not addressing those with urgency and ensuring that we effectively deal with those issues. I think we really need an internal conversation where we talk about the social contract, as we have said before. We give each other the guarantees, and we cannot be calling for the removal of sanctions on people that are benefiting and are actually imposing sanctions on us. We have to talk to each other and find each other. Sanctions no Zimbabwean will call for sanctions that will harm or hurt the citizens, that will harm our communities. But we are calling for those sanctions ourselves when we, for example, low investment. I have moved along Shishavani Shurugwi Road. If you see what investment in the mining is doing in Wange, if you go where mining is taking place in a national park and the like, that is sanctions, because we are sanctioning even future generations. We are mortgaging our resources. We are taking away from the future generations. And those are issues that we have to deal with. If we get guarantees and genuine conversation forms in those regards in terms of resource mobilization, financial flows. How are we, respecting the informal sector, artisanal, small scale mining and the like?
Sorry, Janet, we're losing you. We're losing you, Janet.
That are focused towards that, then we can begin to have conversations. And I'm sure I'll catch it. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Okay, before I come back to Rutendo, anybody else want to come in? Okay, then Rutendo, you have 2 minutes, eh? Off you go.
Prof, thank you very much. I think that there is a bit of unfairness the way you're moderating here, because you allow other people to speak until they make their points, but you are trying to muzzle me by giving me a specific period of time. Janet spoke for 8 minutes.
Janet and them were initially discussants on the program. This is open to the group, to the rest of the floor, which we usually give shorter time to. So I'm not going to give you a long time. So make your point. I already gave you a long time in your first presentation. You spoke for very long.
But Prof, you didn't have anybody to speak against the one narrative that you've got here. So the question is, why didn't you get people to balance it? I'm here to balance the issues.
Fine,
but
that's why I gave you that extra time. And now I'm giving you a time to come in again because Mr. Mangwana pulled out. Okay.
And I'm coming here to rebuttal the lies that have been said. So for instance, you've got this, nobody has addressed the issue of the illegality of sanctions and the fact that they're a violation of human rights. No one of your people have addressed that. Number two, they keep making false accusations, false allegations, and trying to use those false allegations to be a reason why illegal sanctions or human rights violations must be levied on the people of Zimbabwe. Some of the complaints that Janet is coming up with, she's saying that roads are not being built, infrastructure is not being built, the youth are not getting service, hospitals are not getting services. We are saying that that's exactly the impact of sanctions. When a government is not able to get money from multilateral lending institutions, to get cancellation of colonial debts, because it had to rebuild the country from the destruction of British colonialism that did not develop basic services for the people of Zimbabwe, as it was supposed to do according to the UN Charter that says that any colonizer must develop colonized peoples. The British didn't do that. They did not pay reparations after their colonialism of 90 years. Yet we know that the Jews were given for 5 years of colonialism or 5 years of oppression by the Germans. They were given almost $100 billion in reparations. They're still receiving those reparations. Zimbabwe was colonized 20 times more. We had Jacob Mafume trying to make it sound like he doesn't understand why I'm saying the Zimbabwean constitution is illegitimate. It is illegitimate because the MDC was assisted by a crime against humanity called Sanctions to come into power. And by so doing, that means that the MDC is not legitimate. It used force, it used terrorism, it used something illegal to get into our parliament. And therefore, when it's making laws as an illegal entity, as an entity that used crimes against humanity, They obviously cannot be trusted to make the laws of the country. They should be punished the way the Germans were punished. The Nazis were punished for crimes against humanity. Why can't the same happen to MDC? Then we had Hopewell saying that there have been no hospitals that have been built in Zimbabwe ever since the beginning. There have been a 1,200 medical services, medical facilities that have been built by the Zimbabwean government. They've put in they put in 20,000 new beds, and infant mortality was reduced from 200 kids per every 1,000 born to less than 38 by the Zimbabwean government because of the work the Zimbabwean government has done. So it's not true that the Zimbabwean government has not done anything. It built 5,709 schools. That's why we've got the best education system on the African continent. All these things are now being affected by these sanctions. And that's why we've got right now the United States itself, its Congress Subcommittee on Global Human Rights, Health, and Organization is undertaking an impact assessment because of pressure from myself after they sent agents of theirs to talk to me about why we're complaining about the sanctions punishing people. They are measuring the impact of their sanctions on human rights and health in Zimbabwe as the United States, and they haven't come up with results. So how can people assume that the sanctions are not affecting people when we don't know what the impact assessment is saying? The UN is in Zimbabwe right now, measuring the impact of sanctions. Until they are finished with their report, no one can claim that the sanctions in Zimbabwe are not affecting people when institutions like the United States and the UN have decided to measure the impact of those sanctions. And then finally, before I finish, I want to say that there is a lot of trade that is being curtailed by these sanctions. We've got the Infrastructure Development Bank of Zimbabwe, having been put under sanctions, couldn't develop infrastructure, couldn't develop rail, roads, telecommunications. We've got IDC that was supposed to develop the factories that produce chemicals for our water treatment. They were denied money. They were denied money by the United States, confiscating $220 million of theirs. They were denied money when IDC South Africa refused to lend them money because of fear of being under sanctions. We've got the small and medium small and medium enterprise business. It's an NGO that was denied $2 million that was confiscated by the Americans. The Americans have made sure that we cannot get machinery, we cannot get tools, we cannot get our industry going. Those are the sanctions. So exporting blueberries is what slaves have been doing for the past 700 years. Exporting agricultural produce is not manufacturing. It's not industry. And it is industry that was targeted by these sanctions. It is agricultural machinery that was targeted by these sanctions. And so these are the issues that I'd like us to talk about. The legality, the human rights violations of these sanctions. They are illegal. You cannot justify them by making allegations. Everything that the guys have said the Zimbabwean government is doing has not been tested in a court. It has not been taken in front of a judge. No one has been proved guilty, even though the corruption is the one that's destroying Zimbabwe. Who has been found guilty of corruption for us to say that that is a clear case of corruption that is destroying Zimbabwe? And just because there's corruption does not mean that sanctions are not affecting Zimbabwe, because we know that the greatest corruption of this century was the United States banking crisis that cost the world over $40 trillion, but it did not crash the United States because the United States has no sanctions upon it. Sanctions are a crime against humanity and they should be canceled.
Okay, thank you. All right, anybody else want to come in before we close up? Anybody else?
Yes, Prof. Again,
Hopewell, hold on. Just hold on. Anybody else?
Yes, Prof. This is Dewa.
Okay, Dewa, come in.
Thank you so much. I think what is important is for people like Rutendo and others who are talking about the impact of sanctions to be very clear in naming and characterizing the sanctions as of today, because clearly the aspect of US sanctions preventing international financial institutions from giving money to Zimbabwe does not and has not been an issue, because at the moment we know that close to $1 billion has been given to Zimbabwe by the IMF. So we need to be factual and to point clearly to the so-called impact. If we look at this so-called second dispensation, what's important is to say what has been its contribution to the sanctions issue? In fact, there has been additional targeted sanctions that have arisen since July 2018 because of two things that the government is failing to address. One is corruption, and we know that Kulakwashe Tagbire and his companies have been placed on sanctions because of corruption and national looting. There is also the issue of the killings of innocent people in Zimbabwe that has resulted in 4 people being placed on sanctions. These are the things that Rutendo and others should address directly. Whether or not Rutendo supports the looting of national resources as reported by the Zimbabwe Auditor General and implicating Kulakwashe Tagbire where there has been no accountability, where there has been no justice. These are the things that we need to address and not to use sanctions as a ruse. Thank you.
It's time we have to bring this, unfortunately, to a close. I think that what we've seen here today, obviously, is the huge polarization of this discussion. Also, in some cases, just the lack of information, the misinformation, but also the sense that we're dealing with an issue which clearly has huge political significance. I think the airing of these views in the way that we have seen is important because it shows the kind of differentiation in the views that are available. And I also want to say that I'm sure this is not the end of the discussion. We're going to have more once the UN rapporteur has made a report. I'm sure we'll have a chance to discuss that again. And I just want to say at the end, I'm very sorry that Mr. Mangwana pulled out. I think it would have been good. In his first presentation, he made a very short presentation. I thought we would hear more from him. And I hope that I would be able to go back to him for him to expand more on that. Unfortunately, he chose not to. As I said, that's his right. We had also invited the MDCT, Manzora's MDCT to come, but they turned down the invitation due to another commitment. So again, I hope that in future we can open up this discussion again and on the basis, perhaps, as I said, on the report that comes out of the UN rapporteur and the responses that we get to that. With that, I'm just going to hand over to, I don't know, Monjozi, you want to say something to close off?
No, Prof, I think it's Molly who is supposed to give closing remarks.
Okay.
I had wanted to ask a question, but I think let's close.
Is Molly still there?
Thanks, Brian. Sorry, I think we lost Molly. So okay. Maybe let me just close up a few.
Sure, you can close. Yeah.
Thanks, Prof. Yeah, just to say thank you on behalf of SALO for joining us today. Thank you for making the time. There was a lot of interesting engagement here on the Zoom platform. I know the Facebook platform, there was also a lot of interaction. So thank you all for joining us, whether you joined us here or on Facebook. And thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to all the discussants and those who spoke from the floor. At SALO, we always try to have a very wide and broad spectrum of voices in all of our meetings, especially on topics like this where there are some differences that we all have. If you would like to be added to our mailing list for the future, please do leave your email in the chat and we will be sure to add you. But on behalf of SALO, thank you for joining us, and thank you to the Norwegian Embassy for making this meeting possible. It definitely will not be our last meeting on this very important topic, and we will be following it up with further engagements. Unfortunately, an hour and a half is probably not enough for us to discuss all of this, and this is not the last of it. So thank you all for joining us, and if you'd like to watch the recording, I've posted SALO's Facebook page on the chat, and you can watch the recording there. Thank you so much, and thank you, Prof, for chairing, and thank you to all the speakers.
Thank you.